Hello again, everybody. I am back for the second time today. This time in a very awkward interview that is both in person and virtual. While it might not look like it, Noah is sitting directly across from me,
Yeah.
and we're going to be talking, looking at each other completely through the screen. So don't look at me.
I'll try to remember to look at you through my laptop. But yeah, it's awkward, but it's also fun. It's good to be here. Thanks for doing this twice today. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yes, it is. It is good to have you. So we're going to talk today about. It's going to be like almost a podcast style talk today, where you and I are just going to talk about the public API network. I can't. I have to look at the screen. We're going to talk about the public API network and what was announced today, and where you see the public API network going with Postman. So before we do that, why don't you introduce yourself and what you do at Postman?
Sure. So my name is Noah Schwartz. I joined Postman a little under a year ago. I look after the public API network. Prior to that, I was at AWS for 6 years. I looked after a bunch of AWS marketplace there. So I've kind of got this career going now in these two-sided networks. And that's really what the public API network itself is all about. You have on Postman, you have millions of developers who are collaborating on API development, API design. They're doing that with collections of workspaces. And so what the public network enables publishers to do, publishers are folks, companies and individuals who have build APIs and want to distribute them to customers. The public network enables those individuals, those companies to distribute their APIs to their existing community on Postman, and then also grow their community by reaching out to the community of developers we have using Postman in the first place. So it's super exciting. It's been growing a ton, even in the short time I've been here. Can't take any credit for it. It's all the team that was already there in place. But it's really cool to be a part of it.
Some of the stuff that was released today, or really recently, I guess, announced today, that has been trickling into the application over the past month or so. Let's first talk about, first, the public API network is not new. It's something that I am honestly slightly embarrassed to admit I always forget it exists. I usually use Postman as a API test client and a place to house my API specs and run tests and all that. I always forget that it's basically a database of APIs, and not just a database of APIs. It's how the API should be presented and information about said APIs that people can use just kind of off the shelf. Now, the cool things that are coming out that have just recently come out. Let's talk about verified teams a little bit, because that was announced today. Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah. So that's I don't know. It's like such a small thing because it's just an icon on the screen, but it's insane how powerful like one little visual cue can be and how important it is. And it was funny when I joined Postman. Even back when I was interviewing for the role here, I was looking at the network. I saw all of this content from these well-known brands, well-known companies, and it didn't occur to me that there was going to be all this additional community content, which we're super super thankful to have. But developers, when they come to the network, if they know, for instance, that they want to use Discord, or they know that they want to use Zoom, like if you type in Zoom, you're going to see a lot of teams with a similar name, and some of them are actually content related to Zoom. But you probably want to start with one that's officially from Zoom, the authority on the Zoom API. That's really what the Blue Badge is all about. It's just that being able to have that identification. Okay, I'm using Zoom. This is the real Zoom workspace. This is from the developers of Zoom. This is the maintainers of Zoom, and so I can use this with confidence. And I know it's updated. I know it's curated. I know it's up to date. Getting the badge is, you can't pay for it. You can't. You know what I mean? It's not just a simple application process. We actually expect quite a bit from our publishers. The expectations there are really around like the quality of the workspace, the completeness of the collection, the documentation, examples, use cases, setting up integrated authorization so it's easy to get to a 200 OK quickly, not getting stuck in how to set up auth. What's been even more encouraging about it is like our publishers seem to love doing it because they love hearing our opinion on how to best serve their developer community. So that's really what it's all about. It's trust and authority for developers who want to use an API. They see that badge and they say, okay, like this is the way for me to do it.
And it also provides a little bit better of a user experience when working with those APIs, right? I don't know if it's exclusive to verified teams, but it's recently announced Easy Auth as well, which greatly reduces the friction to getting that first successful call. Is that an exclusive thing to verified teams?
No, that's not exclusive to verified teams. This is something that actually works across Postman. So if you can prove you own the domain, you can set up an authorization scheme that'll show up in the application. So for instance, Alan, you work at Memento, and of course you're also verified, and you set up integrated authorization. And so if someone, and I've done this myself, if someone were to go and start hitting one of your endpoints, they would see a little pop-up, a little notification, or if they went to the authorization tab, they'd see your logo. Obviously, you can guide them on how to set up authorization. And the way we do that validation on the back end is we, as you're familiar, we search for a TXT record on the domain. So you prove authority, you prove ownership, prove trust. And so then actually anywhere that domain is used across Postman, the developer, whether it's a personal workspace or a team workspace or a private workspace, doesn't matter. They'll actually see that little queue to authorize with you in that integrated, easier fashion. And that's really, it's very, like, the intention is very similar to what we're doing with the verified team badge, helping developers get to the 200 OK faster, have a better experience. And we actually require it for the badge. So like you can do auth separately, but you can't get the badge without an auth integration.
Really can't like overstate enough how nice, how convenient of a feature that is for the Easy Auth. And to say it in different words than you just said it in, if I paste the base URL for an API that has this configured as a publisher, it will pop up, do you need help authorizing? And we'll go and authorize and get that API key and put it back in and do the auth for you.
Yeah. I've been writing code for 32 years, and not all of that was calling public APIs, but it's pretty wild how just it doesn't seem to matter how much experience you have with it. Like there's always bumpiness with authorization, and that little pop up that's like this is the credential you need. We'll package it in a header for you, or we'll send it across as a query parameter for you. Don't worry about the right way to convey that information to the publisher because they took care of it. Is like, it's technically like syntactic sugar because it's just a shortcut to do something you could otherwise do yourself, but it's such a nice convenience.
Yes, it is. And another one of the things that I really like that you guys have recently done, and it's my favorite thing that was announced today, is related requests. And cool. That one I think is a big one. Can you talk about that one a little bit?
Yeah. So there's a bunch of interesting facets on this one. I think what I like most about this is just I guess for folks listening. So the idea with related requests is if you're trying to use someone's API, and maybe you're doing that in a private workspace, you're doing it maybe personally or again as a team, doesn't really matter. But the point is you're not using the official public content. You may not know that the person who owns that API is actually, or the company that owns that API is on the network, and that they have this curated workspace, they have these curated collections to help you get to the outcomes you probably want to get to. So now we have this little tab on the right-hand side that like lights up if you're using an API that we have on the network, and you can pull it out. And what I like about it is that like you can, so for instance, you could see, let's use Memento again. If I'm using Memento's API, I can see that Memento has a collection, but I don't actually have to fork it. What we see a lot of our customers actually doing is that they're seeing proper usage of the request, and they're seeing that like in context when they're using the client within Postman. And so even though they're not forking, even if they're not forking, they're getting so much value just seeing like, well, this is what a correct request looks like. And of course, they can copy that right into their request bar. And it's just these like little shortcuts. And that one's like actually kind of a loop, right? If you think about it, because the publisher is putting content in, to the network. We're bringing that content to where the developer is and the client. So even if they're not on the network, even if they don't know we have an API network, they're still seeing the content, and then they're getting value out of it. And then at the end of the day, that's a good outcome for the publisher and the consumer, because the publisher wants the consumer to be able to call their API successfully, and that's presumably why the consumer is using the client, because they want to get that API call. And so it's sometimes we think of it as like a proactive search, like we're searching on your behalf for the thing that might help you with what you're trying to accomplish.
I find so much value in this because very rarely am I ever something. I build workflows all the time. It's one of my things is building automations that do whatever, make my life easier. And it's never a single API call. It's this one, and then that one, and then this one, then this one. Maybe I'm doing 8 to 10 things. And knowing what's next is usually the hard part. Getting that information presented to you automatically when you add a single endpoint to say you should probably also do this is pretty vast.
Yeah. That we hear that a lot too. People will be starting with they use one API from a publisher. That's just where they're starting. There's probably something else they end up needing to use, and they're just like seeing the request there, seeing the documentation, seeing samples, seeing an example of how to get to a 200 OK is like you said, it saves you time. It saves you some thinking. Definitely helpful, and also there's the context.
Yeah. Now, I love doing speculation and forward looks, but we'll probably put a pin in that for now, because I don't want to derail us completely about talking about the API network. What else came out recently? Like, was there anything else that you guys have done that's new that was announced today?
Specific to the network?
Specifically to the public API network.
I think you covered some of the big ones. We had an API award ceremony today, which I thought was fun.
What awards did you give out?
So we had 2 award categories, and we actually debated quite a bit internally on which categories to start with, and lots of opinions. We borrowed a lot from other award ceremonies like the Emmys, and things obviously have nothing to do with APIs, but just how people think about these things. And so the 2 categories we came up with, best API overall. Best is such a subjective word, but the idea there is who's doing the most work to create the best developer experience and is able to prove it in the numbers. So some of that's, to a degree, it's popularity and usage, but it's not like, if the usage is high but the experience is bad, you're not getting an award. It's heavy usage. Yeah, no offense to anybody. So it's heavy usage with good outcomes for developers. And some of the metrics we look at are the ratio of 200 OKs, right? How frequently is a person getting a 200 OK versus getting a client error in particular. Server errors tend to be low, but sometimes you see that too in the network. That was tough, but 25 great award winners there. Salesforce taking first place. And then the second category we did, because we didn't just want it to be these APIs that had but just have a ton of forks. It was also the folks who built community in the last year. Those 5 award winners, Discord, HubSpot, et cetera. Really what we're recognizing there is companies who are meeting their developers where they are on Postman, and kind of cultivating that network and then building activity around it. So that was really exciting. I think, it was exciting. It's exciting for us, to be honest, because just seeing how much success some of these publishers are having, reaching their consumers, and seeing the success those developers are having using the network is really, because that's why we're building this. So it's really gratifying for us. We're just kind of facilitating it. And I think it's a real testament to them. Abhinav said it earlier in the keynote. There's 100,000, he said, APIs, and just for the avoidance of doubt, that's unique base URLs on the network. That's a lot of services. And so to be one of 30 out of 100,000 is pretty wild.
Agreed. Now let's talk about that number. You said 100,000 APIs in there. Is this all companies? Like who could be on the public API network in general?
Yeah, I get asked like all the time, like, hey, how do I get on the network? Can you get me on the network? I have like former colleagues in mind. They're like, hey, can you help me get on the network? Can I get on there fast? And like, there's like this assumption that there's this like crazy process that you apply or something. So anyone can be on the network. Anyone can go, you create a public workspace and you're on the public API network. And it's actually that simple. And it's also, but it's very intentional too, because, you know, we're talking here a lot about companies and their large developer communities. But, you know, for me personally, one of the most gratifying things that I see happening on the network is education about APIs. You know, folks who create content, I believe you've created quite a bit of your own content and put it on the network. Maybe I'm mistaken. You know, but it's not even just collections, it could be flows too. People who put content on the network, and for a lot of the consumers of those APIs, it might be tied to what they're doing on YouTube or what they're doing on Twitch, the publisher themselves, and like they're educating their followers, their audience on how to use APIs. And so like that first experience the developer is having with an API, it's happening on Postman. That's why there's no barrier to entry, because it's not just for companies who have APIs, who have products that they sell. It's actually for content creators, it's for educators, it's for new companies who are launching on the network, who are getting their first customers. You know, we see this as being, you know, for everybody. It's a distribution platform for APIs.
So going back to the verified teams thing,
Yeah.
are you only verifying companies? Are you verifying people as well?
So the verification process right now really hinges on like having a domain and being able to prove you're the authoritative owner of a domain. That's, I don't want to say that's like the only requirement, because as I said before, we have an expectation from publishers on the quality of the content, but we don't gate on like the number of customers you have. We don't gate on, you know, how many forks you have. So yeah, we thought about it honestly, but it's antithetical to what I was saying before. You know, it's not a verification program for people who, you know, already have, I don't know, like a super well-known brand. It's a verification program for someone to say, I am the authoritative owner of this API, and you can trust using this. So we don't have a verification program yet for individuals as a result of that, like, you know, how I'm talking about it, because it's really about saying, you know, I am the team, I am the company behind this API, and you can trust me. We're thinking about other types of verification programs, more for individuals, community contributors, things like that. So it is for teams, but there's no like bar on like the size of your company, the size of your team, or the number of customers you have.
That makes a lot of sense. So I think I'm past all of the cool things that we wanted to talk about for like what is public API network and what were the cool things that were released. Now I want to go into speculation, because that's the fun part. And you know, I'll speculate, and you don't have to say yes or no, or divulge any roadmap items, but you can if you want. There's obviously a lot of work going on with Postbot and generative AI, and it's very clear that you guys are going in heavily on that. Is there anything? Can you tell us? Is there anything that is coming to like Postbot that will help people consume the public API network? Because so far, the thing with like related requests is definitely going to help with visibility, but it's sometimes hard to discover APIs that are in there. Is there anything coming to make that easier?
So what I'm very comfortable saying is, you know, when we think about consumers of public API specifically, right? People who are trying. If you think about what's happening with the public API, you're delegating a responsibility to somebody else, right? I want someone else to take care of payment processing for me. I want someone else to take care of caching for me. I want someone else to take care of, you know, I don't want to go build my own CRM, right? That's what you're doing. You're delegating a responsibility to another developer, maybe a soloist, maybe a developer at a company who built a service that solves a problem that you need solved, right? And our goal is, you know, we talk a lot about publishers, but for a consumer, the goal is to help like they have some other job that they're doing, and they need to delegate this responsibility to this service, this public API, to get to that outcome. So maybe I'm building a website where, as you know, I barbecue. Maybe I'm gonna start selling like barbecue goods or something, right? That's what I care about, right? Like all the stuff I need to go build that website is just a means to an end. And so we think a lot about what developers do when they're setting out to go build something, right? And one of the things they do is, okay, well, what are my options for this responsibility that I have? Who can I lean on for payment processing? Who can I lean on for shipments? What APIs exist for me to solve this problem? And so, of course, you can assume safely that that's something we think about for the network. How can you go to the network and have more of I'm trying to build this and present that as a prompt, and then get like an actual solution to building that thing on the network. Sorry, it got very loud in here suddenly, but
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty valid idea.
Got it. We might actually have to stop because it did get very loud in here, and it does not look like it's going to get any quieter anytime soon, which is fine, because this has been a fantastic conversation. We talked about the new things. We talked about what the API network is, who can be on it. Is there anything else that you want to leave us with, things that we can look forward to about the network besides use it?
Well, you're still using it. If anyone, we always love getting feedback, whether it's easy to use or hard to use. So, if you're not using it, we want that feedback too. Why aren't you using it? And whether you're a publisher or consumer. And if you want to publish on the network today, go to postman.com/explore. And then on the bottom left side, you can go ahead and create your public workspace, and you can be on there in a few minutes.
Cool. So let me ask actually one more question, because Andres told us that they can still hear us okay. We just can't hear each other very well. What kind of analytics can publishers that are on the network look for? Like what's built in there to help them improve?
Cool. I'm glad you asked that. So we have a feature called public workspace metrics. And you could see like a lot of your funnel there. We don't break it out as a funnel. You can see the number of views you have. You could break that down by your workspace or your collection. You can see forks broken out by collection. You can see it broken out by time, so by week or by month. And then recently, we also added the ability to see total API calls, so the volume of requests made against your content, and then also the response code distribution. So you can start getting some of these insights into like, okay, well, how often is someone getting a successful response versus a client error versus a server error? How often are they having an auth situation, running into a 401, say versus a 2XX? And you can look at that as a volume of API calls, but you can also look at it in terms of unique users. So you can see how many and this is like really important to me actually, because I call this developer traffic. Because I'm sure people listening, and yourself and myself, like when you work at a company and you have these APIs in production, most of the charts that get looked at are, if people are looking at charts, hopefully they are. It's like, well, what's the latency? Did it breach some threshold? Was my API available? What was my error rate over some 5-minute window? It's very production use case oriented, which is incredibly important. When you're using an API, you expect them to have, this maybe just usually an SLA associated with it. But what's happening to a developer at their desk trying to use your API as an owner of an API, it's very hard to get that information, because you don't know when someone's calling your API from a command line versus calling it from production. But when they're calling it through Postman, you can assume they're testing or trying to integrate with you. And so like that signal that you get, oh, well, developers are, 30% of my developers are having an auth issue. I think that's been surprising for a lot of our publishers. Some of them seeing 5XX errors that they weren't expecting in development. So there's been some pretty interesting insights there. And, that's another area where I think you could safely assume we want to expand in the service of helping publishers have great APIs.
I really like approaching the analytics like this, because I used to run dev teams, and we used to look at Datadog dashboards that would give us metrics around API gateway inside of AWS. And we really approached it from like basically a performance indicator, and that was it. It was like what are our slow endpoints? We're building on serverless, so it's like, well, let's figure out what the high latency endpoints are so we can lower those and reduce our bill. But what I like about the analytics that you're talking about, really the lens that you were just talking about, all the analytics, was from a developer experience point of view. How many times am I getting a 403 or a 401 ultimately that turns into how easy are my docs to consume to ultimately get people out the door. So it's a really good turn, or I guess a really good approach to analytics, which is something that I never really did as an engineering manager. I guess you could do it in theory with the dashboards that I had, but it really feels like Postman's prioritizing the developer experience.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about how I would have been able to do this in my prior life. You know, I've you know, you and I, you know, we haven't talked about it today. We talked about the application developer versus the service developer. So I'm just gonna move out of the way here. Sorry. You know, we talked about application developers versus service developers. You know, and it really informs how you think about the product that you're building. So I was trying to put myself back in their shoes. Like, okay, when I was building applications that had APIs, you know, what were the things I was thinking about? When I was building services that had APIs, what were the things I was thinking about? And in both cases, I was thinking about, you know, production, and I was thinking about maybe different aspects of it and focusing on different parts. But I don't think often enough I was thinking about like the human beings who were trying to use this product that I looked after, and like, how would I even do that? I mean, obviously you could do it, you know, because you could add some instrumentation. You can maybe ask them to like send a flag or something, and you could do it that way. But it would be so bespoke, and it would just cover, you know, maybe they're using your SDK, but you don't get all these other examples. And we're lucky with so many developers already using Postman as an API platform, Postman as an API client. There's so much signal that we can just automatically give to publishers other APIs so that they can think this way about their customers. Okay, I guess we're getting kicked out of here. Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so for real this time, we're not going to end this stream because it's loud, which it still is, but we are going to wrap this up because we just got kicked out of our space. So bad planning on my part, but I do appreciate the time. Noah, I like all the stuff that's coming out, the prioritization of the developers, and just the focus on enabling people to build, honestly. A lot of my speculation, I'll just do it super fast. A lot of my speculation about the public API network and Postbot in general is marrying the two. So I can ultimately say, build me an app that does X, Y, Z, and they can go out and fetch high quality APIs from the network, bring them in, build.
Like I said, we think about what developers search for, how they think about problems, and how do I build X is a very common question that a developer asks, and we want to help them do that faster. And so that makes what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me.
Love it. All right, well, we got to go. So thank you for the time, and we'll see you later.